Hey there, good morning everybody. Welcome to this panel discussion on how to drive adoption with developer portals. My name is Tej Ravindra and I work on product here at Apigee.
Hi, I'm Chris Novak and I'm on the engineering team with Apigee. I work on dev portals, and I'm also, before that, we're working with the customer success team helping companies adopt or create a dev portal.
And my name is Martin Nally. I'm also in the engineering team here, and I work on a number of different things, including a little bit on developer portal.
Excellent. So I think we have a lot of different interesting things to talk about, but I want to start at the very basic question of all of this, right? Why even have a developer program? What is a developer program and why have it?
That's a good question, Tej. A developer program is an initiative to help a company bring in developers to start using their API. And the reason it's important is because if you make an API and no one's showing up for it, it's no reason to create the API.
Yes, absolutely. That's probably the primary driver, and it's the most obvious one. Another thing that I think is important that is sometimes missed is that an API is actually a two-way street. So it's a two-way relationship between the provider and the consumer. And so one thing that's very important in an API program is being able from the provider's side to know who your customers are and how well those customers are doing. So part of this is the topic that you just introduced of how do I advertise and get adoption of my APIs, but there's all the ongoing understanding who my customers are and how I'm serving them.
And so the audience can be both your external your customers, external developers or partners, or it could be internal, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up, is that a lot of people think of a developer program being important just for external developers, but this is true for internal developers also, because especially in the larger the company it is, the easier it is to have services that other areas of the company aren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So as we talk about the creating a developer program, it's good to keep in mind that this can be either your internal developers in the company, it can be external developers that haven't been engaged with your company yet, or it can be these partners of your company, they're already there. And what you want to do is bring in other channels or areas they might not have been aware of before, or just make the adoption a lot faster for those third parties.
I think the external one is a very obvious one, but I think the truth is that the number of companies that have a major business in marketing APIs to externals is actually less than the number of companies that have an internal need. And in fact, I believe that having an API program and running an API program is an essential part of making any sort of service-oriented architecture initiative successful inside a company. So I believe that we all have a need of a developer program. Some of us have a need for it in an external way because selling APIs and signing up consumers is part of our business. But even if you don't have that, you need an API program to manage your internal collaborations and cooperation.
In fact, an example that comes to mind is a conversation I was having with a customer who mentioned that they've acquired many different smaller companies who all have their own technology stack that they prefer to work on. And instead of forcing everybody to do the same thing, people are still working on the technology stacks of their preference, but exchanging services via APIs. So I thought that was a great example of where APIs are so helpful internally.
You also got a lot of talk right now about microservices. So people are interested in taking large monolithic systems and breaking them up into smaller units, and usually they're trying to get sort of better independence and quicker evolution, quicker change, and things like that. Well, the key to making those microservices work is defining the APIs between them and having to manage those. So understanding, allowing a larger community to know what those APIs are, which ones are available and how to use them, and then managing the interactions between them is key.
I think one of the things about asking why create a developer program and what is a developer program is to point out that when you first have an API, you just have an API. And what you really need is that whole ecosystem around it. So you need a team that can help promote it. You need support people. Let's say you just start, you might not need a whole team for each of these things. It could be one person with many responsibilities, but someone needs to be responsible for laying out how are we going to support this when we start getting questions. How are we going to get questions from people that are using our APIs? Also, what tools are available?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the key things that we're going to talk about also, is the fact that a developer portal is so useful to bring all this information into one spot. And then another part of your strategy for a developer program should also be, do you have any events? So if you have an internal or external developers, can you put together a workshop so you can bring people in,
Mm-hmm.
talk them how to use it, and help them use your API?
So it sounds like, I mean, there's definitely, many different components of the developer program that we need to track, right? So one is just like all the information that needs to get out there for people to understand that you have this developer program. Then the other piece is the tools that you will use to enable your developers. Then there's the team. So you really need an owner, that's what I'm hearing, a developer evangelist at your organization who's really driving this effort. And then there's, of course, the actual channel that you're going to use to roll out the program, which is your portal.
If you think you have a personal working relationship with the users of your API, you can probably manage that through sort of more informal kind of communications. But as soon as you're trying to bring in more people,
Mm-hmm.
or you have a situation where you don't have a tight sort of organizational link with every one of the consumers, then you have a huge problem about how you advertise and control those kind of interactions. And at that point, I think you really need somebody to take that on as a job. That's really, you have to recognize that that's not going to happen by itself, and you really need somebody to own and manage it.
That's a great point. So if you're trying to scale your efforts,
Yeah.
you need to structure your thinking about this. Great point. So, do you want to add anything more about a developer program?
Well, I was thinking one other thing is that when you think about why you want to create one, we've discussed too about how important it is to lay out your goals. So it's kind of a question that you should be asking yourself: why are you creating your API? Why do you have a program? And how are you going to measure the success of your program over time and bring that feedback in and see if you're meeting your goals?
Great point. Anything else on this, Martin?
I think that's great. Yeah, set some measures.
So now that we've talked about why you would even want to have a developer program in the first place, what are the components that you should be thinking about, then the next question becomes how to build this developer program. I think we touched on a lot of these components.
So if you're trying to support developers, I think the biggest piece of that is that you have to make sure that you do have people in the role to support it. And when you're talking about things like trouble ticketing and having ways to support them, and the question was about doing it in an agile way. I think that one of the big things is that if you don't already have a developer program or developer portal set up, that you can do it in an iterative way, that you don't need to make sure that you have a huge forum set up right off the bat. You can start with just having a easy ask questions and take in a form and start building your forums over time, because you don't really want to have a huge forum with 10 different topics and one post in each one. So it's a better way to actually, you might want to do things like think about having your closest partners or your internal developers open your developer portal up at first just to a few people, and then help engage them to get them to start putting forum questions up there when they ask questions, or just feed in some of the questions you've been asked before, or even start with just an FAQ. Mm-hmm. So instead of just trying to lay out some huge support ticketing system, you can just have ask questions all over your portal.
I like this question because it's a good indication, it's a good example of kind of what the scope is that you have to be looking at. When I think of sort of publicizing APIs, APIs are a little bit like courting or getting married or something like that. And there's a lot of things that go into making that relationship successful. So you have to create an initial attraction, right? So when you're publishing your API, you have to make it sort of look good. You have to make people understand, what the benefit's going to be, why this is going to be attractive to them. And the problem ticket one is a good one also. Like any human relationship, there has to be sort of ongoing contact, ongoing communication, and things like that. So you need a mechanism to get to get communication about problems and things like that, problem tickets back from your users. But one of the goals of a portal is to make that really be a relationship. The most successful portals are the ones where there's a real kind of sense of engagement, that I'm not just opening a problem ticket and then it sits there. I'm actually having a dialogue between the consumer and the provider. So the good portals have good sort of forum feedbacks and discussions around problem tickets and things like that. And in terms of agile development, I don't think a portal is going to dictate exactly how you run your development process. But if you don't have an agile process, if it takes you a long time to respond to legitimate problems, you're going to start losing interest of customers. So the importance of the agility is that when people are having problems, either they found a bug or there are aspects of your API that make it difficult to use, if you're not getting timely response to that, then you're probably going to start losing your audience, even if other parts of your process and parts of your portal are attractive.
Yeah, that's a big part of your developer program, is making sure that you can build up loyalty and also retain your developers you already have. And if you can't support it, and make sure that you're on top of those. So make sure it's really important to, it's easy to forget that piece of it, is if there's anyone in there, make sure that you're engaged with them.
I think you can look, think about your own work, and when you consume something for an API, what you actually look for, and try to make your sort of program address those kind of things. So, typically what I look for, if I go out to I look at some service on the web or some open source community or something like that, I want to go to a place where, and I want to see that they can explain their value quickly. And I want actually to be able to have a practical experience that I can immediately sign up for it or download it or whatever's important, and I can actually see it working sort of in 15 minutes, right? My day's busy if I can't see some value back quickly. And then the other thing that I do is I immediately sort of go Googling. I go and look at their forum. What's the dialogue on the forum? Are they responding in a timely manner? Does it seem like there's an active community? And of course, I'll start looking for other people's opinions as well. I'll start Googling for, how what kind of experience did other people have with this. So that's what I do when I go outside, looking for somebody else's stuff. So when I think about, publishing my own APIs and publishing a portal, I'm trying to meet the same bar of the things that, make somebody else's offering successful for me, or attractive for me.
Yeah, I mean that's a really excellent point, because one of the things is like what are other developers saying about this, right? And if you are in a position where other developers can also answer these questions, that's just amazing position to be in, because you've created a community, an engaged community that's talking to each other. So you're not always the only person responsible for answering the question. You've created this amazing community out there. That's a great point. So actually the next question is a very good segue into our question about what should be in your developer portal. So the question is, what special considerations are there for public internet portals as opposed to internal to your company? So this is a really good segue into basically what should be in your developer portal.
I think that we brought this up a little bit earlier too, saying that one of the things that I've seen companies do is they consider the internal developers a little different. Oh, so you can email, oh hey, can I get your API, where's the docs for it? Oh, let me send you an email to it. One of the things to remember is that the internal developers and external developers are both extremely time sensitive of how much you're using of their time. So if you really need to make sure that your internal developer portal and external both have all the documentation, information there. And back to that whole piece of making it agile, one of the things you really should think about is that how quickly can you update your documentation. Some companies will talk about, oh, we need to make sure that we have a development test environment, and also have our live environment, which really makes sense if you're doing code. But remember, if you're doing content, it's really important to make sure your documentation team can go into the live site, edit a spelling mistake, add a little information because they found out something's missing, compared to waiting a month or two and having some developer come in and find out that oh, here, I'm trying to use your API, and the API is a little off, and there's a mistake on it. That's a quick turnoff to think that this thing's not being supported very well.
Mm-hmm.
So at a general level, I think that as much as possible, you should treat internal users the same way that you would treat externals. So you should not assume that they'll use your stuff just because you're part of the same company and things like that. In fact, often the internals will be your harshest critics. And even if there's some kind of a corporate mandate to use internal stuff, people will find ways to do what they believe is the right thing, not necessarily what's the political thing. So the same kind of standards of making your APIs attractive, making the communication smooth and easy, those kind of things I think apply equally well to internally. You might even have to work harder internally than you would externally. Now there are some differences imposed by things like security. So on a public portal, most people will try to defer any kind of login or sign in as much as possible. So make as much of your public portal truly public as you can, so that it can be indexed by Google. People who are not yet your clients can email information to each other. They can email links to each other about documentation and things like that. I think one of the things that I often see done badly is that marketing departments are so anxious to get your email address that they won't let you see basic documentation until you've sort of filled out a form and given you personal information and things like that. And perhaps that's the right thing. You can negotiate that with your marketing department, but my experience is that really sort of discourages use. If you're doing an intranet portal, that might be different. You might have to sign on before you can actually see information. But even there, you should think very carefully about search. What are the internal search mechanisms within your corporation? Are you using do you have your own search infrastructure, or are you using one of the commercial offerings for search? And try to figure out how you get your portal integrated with your intranet search, and think just about as hard about that as you would think about your Google ratings if you were doing a public portal. So as much as possible, deal with it the same, and then recognize that some of the things around sort of security and sort of privacy and those kind of things might be a little different, but try to make the differences as small as you can.
Yeah, that's a good point too about the external. I mean, if it's an external, you have to consider the fact that you need to worry about security more. But at the same time, you need to be also careful about turning off the developers that are external. For example, if someone logs in, you really got to think of what can they do. They can create a key. They might be able to add comments, things like that. So if I go to a website and I look at this documentation, but then I get logged out every 5 minutes when I move around to actually start following a tutorial, and have to keep on logging in, that's a really big turnoff. So be careful that you don't add too much security on the external by having a CAPTCHA every time you log in. Maybe you can get around not doing that and just do it during register. Things like don't make it time out immediately after 5 minutes if it's just logging in to see a key in the documentation.
So it definitely sounds like it's a really good practice to keep the same quality of portal and documentation for both internal and external developers. One question that I've heard in the past is, we have some really secure APIs, or we have APIs that we actually absolutely don't want anyone to hit unless we approve specifically for that, test key and production key. So in light of these kind of concerns, what is the best practice in terms of having the same developer portal instance for both your internal and external developers versus maybe having one portal specifically for internal developers and one portal for external developers? Any thoughts around that?
So I don't think there's anything wrong with having two portals. It's going to create more administrative overhead. So depending on the portal technology that you're using, if you can find a way just to have a few secure pages, you might find that easier to administer. The security thing, I believe that more and more companies are coming to believe that even for internal APIs that are perhaps only used between two applications belonging to the same company, more and more companies are coming to the conclusion that they need the same kind of security and the same kind of monitoring as they do for externals. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one reason is that the sort of old model is that we've got a big firewall around the company, and therefore if you get through the firewall, once we're on the inside, we don't have to worry about security. So there's kind of there's one locked door that you have to get through. More and more companies are coming to believe that that's not really good enough anymore, and that we have to have multiple multiple bulkheads. Within the organization, and we shouldn't assume that just because you got through the firewall that you can then, anybody can talk to anybody. So more people are looking at it from a security point of view. The other thing that I think happens with, especially internal APIs, is that you can often get more cooperation between the consumers and the producers, which is extremely helpful. So let's say, for example, that I'm introducing a new version of an API. Or I'm actually introducing, I think it's the same API. I don't think I changed the API. It's just a new version of the implementation. So I'm rolling out some bug fixes or something like that. The truth is, it's very difficult to know whether you've broken somebody or not. All kinds of very subtle changes. I changed the length of a string or the format of a string, or some subtle side effect that I didn't think was going to break anybody can. So if you're running an external organization, there isn't very much that you can do about that because you don't have any kind of control of your consumers. Internally, you can do better. Internally, you can say, if you know who all of the consumers are, you can say, in the test system, we're going to run, I know who all my consumers are, so within my own test suite, we can rerun those, because the final measure of compatibility of a new version of an API is, do the existing clients still run? So if I can locate those existing clients and rerun them, then I can test whether or not I've actually broken things. And so having things like API keys and things like that, the kind of things that are the stock in trade of a portal, introducing that internally can provide a huge sort of operational benefit.
An insight into your developers, even though they're internal.
Yes, exactly.
There's one other thing too about the whole security and what you do for external users. Well, this could be true for internal also, is that I've also seen some strategies where if you have some information that is secure, you need a login process, you need a manual approval step, consider the idea, can you have a sandbox with fake data in it? That way, maybe I can even try out your API without even logging in or registering or anything. That is a quick way to say, wow, I see it, I see how it works, now I'm really compelled to actually register.
And so that's a great kind of reminder of some of the things that you should definitely think of having in your portal, which is, request response examples in your documentation, having, I think you mentioned earlier about the importance of curl.
But remember, the word API is a very old API, and we used APIs, in programming languages, in operating systems, and things like that. And when we talk about APIs today, we're really talking about something slightly different. We've sort of changed the definition of the word. We're mostly talking about loosely coupled HTTP-based APIs. And the reason that the whole industry has kind of gravitated towards that is that they're inherently much more simple. They're much more language independent, they're much more operating system independent. So they're a much better contract, loosely coupled contract between clients and servers. And curl is this sort of universal tool that it's a simple command line tool that allows me to send messages to an API and get responses. And if you can show people how to use curl against your API, first of all, it's a great tutorial in how to use the API. If you can show a sequence of curl commands, and if I know how to do that with curl, I know how to do it in any language. I can go, and if I'm a Python programmer, I know how to translate that exact curl request to usage of the requests library in Python. Or if I'm a Node developer, I know how to do it with the request rather than requests library, which is the name of the most popular Node HTTP client. Or if I'm a Java programmer, I know how to translate it. So it's a great sort of discovery tool that doesn't require a whole lot of sort of special knowledge. It's general knowledge that most people have of the internet and is very powerful. And I'd like to underline, one of the comments that you just made about security, because one of the things that can really spoil that simplicity is if I can't get over the security barrier, that your management of keys or tokens, if you're using OS2, is so rigorous that I can no longer have a sort of very simple experience. So you need to figure out how to implement this sort of state-of-the-art security practices without sort of spoiling the simplicity. And some sites do a nice job of that. Some sites, for example, will either give you give you a separate sandbox where security is turned off, which is one way that you can do that. And I've seen other sites that will provide you with a command line tool or some other. The Google Drive, for example, if you look at the Google APIs, they do a nice job of giving you a temporary key that you can use for a little bit of experimentation, but will expire and probably gives you only limited access. They may be combining that with the test data ID. I'm not really sure. But those kind of things, as part of that sort of make things simple, make things approachable, and that's how you engage developers successfully.
And I think that curl, like you said, being so universal as a developer, no matter what language I'm using today or I'm most comfortable with, if you can show me and tie that into maybe even a tutorial and just show, hey, here's the curl calls right down the row, it can be so much quicker for me to spend a short amount of time and go, okay, I get it, I see how this API is useful versus going somewhere else to find a solution.
Yes. The tutorial thing, one of my pet peeves in sort of API portals that I don't think really work is portals that don't give enough attention to what the sort of learning experience will be for somebody new. And I see two different failure patterns. One failure pattern with portals that go sort of too high level. They try to explain what the value is, but it's so high level it's not really useful. We will make your company more profitable and accelerate your sort of integration with the digital economy or something like that. Well, that sounds wonderful. I want those things, but you didn't really tell me anything useful about what you actually really do or how I can, or what I would have to do it. And then the other extreme that I see is people that just dump me into the details of a whole bunch of HTTP requests. It's like dumping me into JavaDoc or something like that. I have no idea what you do. I have no idea how to use your stuff. I have no idea how it fits with anything else. And you're giving me all of this low-level stuff, right? So to me, the trick is, finding the pitch in the middle that really resonates with somebody. Try and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's kind of heard of you. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be on your site. But they don't know much about you, right? Mm-hmm. And also, if they're experienced people, they know that any adoption of an external API has a cost, right? There's always a cost with taking on some kind of dependency, and they're trying to calculate what's the benefit versus cost of working with you. That's the first question that they're going to be asking themselves. And so designing the initial pages of your portal from that perspective, I think is the way to be successful.
Well, that brings up a thought I had too about the whole making it easy. I've seen a lot of implementations too on the API being not really clear on. A lot of people out there still are pretty new and might not realize how OAuth works. So just jumping them saying, oh, you need to set up OAuth might not be enough to get people on board, or actually laying out what the endpoint is. I think I've seen that a lot too, where, hey, what's the endpoint to your sandbox for development? What's the one to production? And making it very clear and having links a lot to that, getting started. Here's how to set the security. Here's what the endpoints are, so you can quickly reference them.
Maybe you should engage some of the people who are your experienced UI developers, not just from the point of view of having a nice UI on your portal, but people who are UI designers are experienced in trying to put themselves in the shoes of the external customer. What does an external an external client, what do they know, what do they don't know, what assumptions can we make, sort of developer personas and things like that. And then they often do UI design in a kind of a day in the life. Let's try to imagine a day in the life of a new user that arrives, what terminology do they have to learn, how do they get started, and things like that. So if you think through your whole API design like that, and let the portal be the be the experience that leads people through that learning story.
Mm-hmm. As you're saying this, I'm kind of drawing parallels in my mind to what like e-commerce companies do all the time. They have a product to sell, they're thinking about the audience, they're thinking what's the fastest way I can get this user to buy the product, and they're kind of thinking of the friction areas, they're thinking of how people learn and all of this, and they do a lot of user testing.
Yes.
So maybe that's something that you can do. We have a
and
ton of questions.
They're very skillful about security as well. Amazon makes me fill out my shopping cart, lets me fill out my shopping cart before they ask me to log in, right?
Yeah.
So they want to engage me first, right? So think like a retailer.
Exactly, and that to a retailer at Black Friday. So are there any good examples of developer portals that you can cite as an audience question? We're definitely going to show you some examples. That's the next thing coming up. We have several questions from Frank about, so I'll just go through and read the questions because it's from the same person. We have now a scaling situation. What are the best practices to get away from the email guide, shipment, email support, technical debt? And then the next part of the question is, how do I keep content in sync in prod versus pre-prod environments? So it's a two-part question. So one is, how do we get away from this legacy way of doing things where I'm emailing documentation and just that whole tech debt around it? Are there any pointers you can give?
I have seen that a lot where when people are first started doing their developer program initiative, they'll have internal Word docs or PDFs and say, oh, here's what we have. And you could say that it's almost like a growing phase where you could say the first one would be, you've got to know the right person to email to get those.
Yes.
Then you can go up a little bit higher level, which is, well, let's at least just attach those PDFs or Word docs onto our portal. The next step up above that, which I think is really important, and I guess what I'm suggesting is just as quickly as possible, don't do those two levels. Get to the third, which is put in HTML, because there's a lot of advantages. One, I can send that link to other people on my team, hey, check this out, this is what we need. If there's questions on support, they can send you the link of, I'm looking at this part of the document.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is that it's searchable by search engines. So if someone's looking for, hey, I need a weather API, get weather, it might bring it right to your page. You're putting it PDF in Word. One more step for me as a developer to go and open that up, look at it, get down to the right spot.
Yeah.
So can I say that the short answer is set up a developer portal?
Yes.
And so seriously, there are a number of vendors who can help you set up a developer portal. Apigee, of course, is one. And a developer portal will come with a package of technologies that help you set up your basic website for advertising your portals. It will help you integrate technical documentation. So your high-level story of what your value is and how to consume your stuff is something that you will need to create. You'll have to invest in that. It's like creating web pages. But the technical documentation is something that's very automatable. So we can show you how to integrate that very quickly and easily into your portal. And since that's based on automated processes, that addresses one of Frank's other questions: is how do I make sure that the content is aligned? And part of the answer to that is that for the lower level technical detail, we can show you how you automate all of that stuff to keep it in sync with your with the actual code of the API. And portal technology comes with things like forums and feedback loops. It comes with a self-service way of administering the keys that the clients will need, either to identify themselves or to prove security and authorization. So, this is a sort of now a relatively mature segment of the market where there are good products available from vendors. So, and the value is high, and it will get you out of this kind of email jail. So if you haven't already done so, time to take the plunge.
Take the plunge. Well, and it's good if you have something in a PDF and Word. If you just generate it, then I guess you should really think about generating a different way. The other thing is it might be kind of old, and it's worth looking at it again anyway. And while you're moving it into a new format, and like Martin was saying, there's a lot of auto generation tools too. And one of the things that we like to do is, because we of course have our own APIs internally, is the whole idea of documentation first. So if you're making a new API, why not start by just laying out that API documentation contract before you even start implementing it? Then you've got your documentation up front, and just make sure it's in a format that you don't have to email to people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could actually probably have a whole different webcast on that of this.
That's true.
So the idea here is that if we can describe an API in a machine readable format, using technologies like Swagger, then we can use that to drive the documentation, the implementation, the adding the non-functional kind of characteristics of API management like security and analytics, monitoring, those kind of things can all be driven from a machine readable contract. So that's another idea that some of the vendors at least are integrating into their portal suites.
Start using Swagger to describe the APIs. So this is a great segue into what are some common gotchas. So Chris, you want to talk about that, and then Martin?
And we've kind of gone over a few of these already, I think, which is, I think the main thing to start with is just to think about putting yourself in the shoes of that developer, or find someone that's a developer that you can just say, hey, check this out. Does this make sense to you? And show them your portal. Can you quickly go, oh, I get what you're doing. I can see the value for it, and I can quickly get started through a tutorial or documentation.
Yes, tell that high-level story. It's like, those websites that just sort of dump you into the reference implementation. It's like the stranger that walks up to you and immediately starts telling you too many personal details, and you think, whoa, this is creepy. Sort of like, so don't be that person. Do the formal introductions. Let's be polite.
Now the courtship reference is making complete sense.
And remember, when you're courting too. Remember, you're courting also business. So developer and business, both of those people should be taken into effect. And one of the things that I know that is true for a lot of user experiences is you can do the hallway test, which you could say, just pull someone and say, hey, spend a little bit of time, give me feedback, and watch how they navigate the site. And once again, we've talked about a little bit of make sure you don't fall into the pitfall of saying, oh, let me just put up some documentation, let me just attach a PDF, and I'm done. Make sure you have that two-way communication, whether it's forums, whether it's a knowledge base, whether it's just asking questions through a forum.
I think another pitfall is the tree falling in the forest. So we talked a lot about that. Make sure your content is indexable, searchable, and that you're linked into the sort of communication channels. Think of it like a search engine optimization kind of problem. Make sure that your portal is inwardly linked from all of the places where you think your customers will be, whether that's on an intranet or in a public forum.
Common approach that you should always remember too is that a lot of times you have a website already, so you might want to take it if you have external, or if you have internal, you can do this too if it's on your intranet. Is that on the footer of all the pages you can just say developers or developer API, and that link will go to a subdomain that has all the information in one spot.
Yes, and I liked picking up again on Frank's theme. Focus on automation. So don't rely entirely on manual processes to maintain your portal. Make sure that the updates of the portal, the updates of the reference documentation are linked into your development process, and to the degree that's possible, focus on the automation part. But don't just rely on automation, because you cannot engage human beings and win their trust and help them have a good experience without there being sort of human communication and human contact in the process. Or even, it doesn't have to be human contact, but sort of intelligent human beings designing content that's, that will attract people and will resonate with people.
Great, and I think our next topic was about developer program checklist, but we've touched a lot of these points. So unless we have anything specific on that, we should move on to showing examples of great portals.
I think we've covered everything, but we do want to, there is one thing that is also making sure, and this goes under the support piece, is that when you make sure you have a way to monitor the health of your APIs and make sure that's accessible or exposed to people, because the last thing you want to do is that you're using an API and then it doesn't work, and then you look I would, as a developer, go immediately to the portal and say, is there any notification that there's a maintenance or there's some error or something going on? You're going to lose trust if you don't have, hey, we're aware of the problem too. We're working on it. We'll let you know when it's fixed.
So you could use that as part of your checklist if you're evaluating portal offerings from different vendors. How well do they do those kind of things? Can they, for example, provide me as the producer of an API? Can you provide me a dashboard of data that shows, how many users I have, how much traffic I have on my API, what the trends are on that traffic? Can they provide that kind of information? And from a consumer's point of view, can they answer the kind of question that you posed? What's the consumer version of that data? It's probably not the same, but basic things like, is there an outage and does anybody know about it? That kind of stuff. Perhaps even a little bit more. Perhaps you can actually, give people statistics on their usage of particular APIs. So give some of your consumers some insight into the ways in which they're using your APIs.
Well, and that brings up the other thing, which is statistics, analytics on your site too, is that a lot of times that's missed in the checklist of going live.
Yeah.
Even if you're not using the data right now, there's a lot of tools out there. You can start collecting that information from the get-go. Are people looking at your blog? Are they looking at your tutorial? Are they looking at other things so you know what to focus on?
Yes. Yeah, so two types of analytics there. One is the sort of general web analytics, like Google Analytics and things like that will give you insight into the usage of your portal. And more specialized analytics that you will only get probably from an API management vendor that will give you insights into the actual traffic through your API.
Great. So I think, this is a good time to start showing some examples of good practices we've seen for developer portals. And one of the ones we were thinking of was First Data. What do we like about the things they've done with their portal?
Yeah, this was a good example of showing how right on the front page you can easily understand their business value. I mean, this is a site where you can see right away, they take care of payment APIs. Easy payments for developers. It's very clear. And you can see the call to action right there on the front page too, is that view the docs or get the code is immediately available for me to get started. I think that they got another slide, this front page, if you scroll down, this section right here is also showing dedicated 24/7 support is really showing, hey, these guys are standing behind their APIs. If I do get stuck, which, these things are technically complex, I'm not going to be stuck hoping that I can get some support on this.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like they also have, pretty easy to understand documentation where you can do requests and get a response.
Yes, that looks like an example of really good technical documentation, which I think is a great thing, so long as it's preceded by more general information on what how you use it.
The original getting started, yeah.
Another good example we thought of was
It's an interesting phrase though, that payment for developers. It's very important to pay for your developers. You cannot have your developers for free.
Many have tried, but
says the developer. So another good example was Twitter, and why do we like Twitter?
Well, this is one of the examples that we brought up for status monitoring and showing how I can quickly look if I'm using Twitter APIs, something doesn't seem to be working, I can find out, are they having issues with their API?
They also had case studies, which we thought was pretty interesting, because then you're giving people examples of what can be done, the possibilities.
That's it. Yes, it's actually very important, and I look for that too when I'm looking for something that I might consume, an API that I might consume. Who else is consuming it? Who's been successful with it? What are the reports out there?
Yeah, you definitely want to be the person who can show, hey, look at what people have already been doing. Don't you want to jump on board and be like them?
Yeah.
Some people like to be the first to try something, but most people are more conservative. They like to know that somebody else has been successful with it.
Try it and test it. So Twilio, we said, had resources even for business.
They've got a really large menu navigation, but it is really nice that you can see that on the top there's not a developer is one of their main menu links, and this can give a bunch of information to any of the business users that are out there going, how can we solve this? I might not be doing the technical implementation, but I can see how this can add value.
So they're talking to more than one audience. That's great.
Exactly.
And they're very clear about who they're talking to. Uber was a really interesting one as well, because they're really trying to push third-party developers to come and build off of their APIs. So one of the things we saw was that they had code right away.
Yeah, and Uber is one of those where they don't have to worry as much about when you go to the site, what is the Uber API? You've got an idea of what they already do, but immediately you can go into this tutorial getting started, and it's very clear of how to make a first request. It kind of cuts off on the screenshot, but immediately right on the bottom of below the folder when you first come up, you can see that we're already starting to write some code to see a request.
Vantiv was another interesting example. There was like a immediate value proposition about what they do. We connect people to payments. So alluding to all our points from earlier.
Yeah, though once again, it's just you go to it, it's a clean looking site, but there's a lot of information that you can grab, and they've got the call to action that you can go from the business value and then down on the page, ready, integrate now. I mean, this is as a big thing.
They have
already.
a call to action over there.
Yeah.
And then Gray's Note, our final example. It's an international audience that they have.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about this is, once again, knowing your developers, and you can see from this site, if we go one slide ahead, this is what that same site looks like in Japanese. So they've made their portal internationalized. So that way, English and Japanese speakers can easily navigate the site and use their APIs.
So again, looking for some technology that allows you to do this easily.
Yes. Well, I think it's a measure of a good portal when I can understand it better in English than in Japanese. when they're both equal, then you know you have a problem.
So we've been taking questions throughout. So if there's any additional questions, this is a good time to ask.
Do you have
fill in the blank templates for tutorials?
That is one thing that a lot of people want on the developer portal is a tutorial, but there's so many a lot of the documentation, I mean, you've got the API reference, things like that are very, there's a lot more tools out there nowadays than there were just even a few years ago. But when it comes into things like tutorials and getting started, it's really hard to find a one-match template because everybody's business is so different from each other. So it's been a challenge to find something but it's pretty easy to get it.
But I like that idea. I'm inspired to go and try and satisfy that, because I think you do see basic patterns. You see so we saw the sort of business value proposition kind of thing, and we saw it done well. We talked about how you give people a hands-on experience. Before you dump them into the detail of all the reference section, how do you give them a hands-on experience, perhaps using curl, or perhaps showing them how to use a language SDK, an SDK for Java or JavaScript or Python. We talked about how do you avoid the security constraints being an impediment to a good first experience and things like that. So I think perhaps, I don't think we can give a detailed template that can just be followed slavishly. But I think we could give an outline or at least a series of points to consider in order in sort of designing your experience. And it might be useful also as a checklist to go back, and once you've actually produced your portal, say, did we sort of satisfy the basic sort of outline or the basic flow that we wanted to achieve.
Yeah, maybe you could start with a template that has those clear, make sure you have the objectives in there. It's like, first start with making a call. Here's how setting up security could be a spot. Don't forget this piece.
Yeah. So excellent challenge. We might not have the response that we want today, but we're inspired by your question.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, related to that, Frank also mentions, so you have a best practice portal with templates and sample navigation. That you see is a great practice. So I guess the answer is yes.
Yes.
So I don't see any more questions. So we thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And please feel free to email us with questions.